So California's Department of Fair Employment and Housing filed a lawsuit late last week against Activision Blizzard Inc., alleging all kinds of claims about workplace discrimination, harassment, and retaliation on the basis of sex. What exactly are the allegations, and what do they need to prove in order to win? All of that coming up on Legal Bytes. Hey everyone, welcome to Legal Bytes. I'm Alyte, I'm a lawyer, and on this channel we explain the law one bite at a time. And sometimes we cover the intersection of law and gaming. But really quick before we get into the lawsuit, first I want to say thank you to everyone that has watched, liked, commented on any of our videos, and also subscribed to the channel. We recently passed 4,000 subscribers, so we are really well on our way to our first 10,000 subscribers. I know that there's been a recent boost coming from a collaboration that I did with Nate the lawyer on a video about the United States women's soccer team and their equal pay lawsuit against the United States Soccer Federation. So to all of you new folks, welcome to the party. And if you're watching this and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell, all the good YouTube-y stuff, so you can follow along with us on our journey to the first 10,000 subscribers. Okay, let's get into the lawsuit. Okay, so for starters, this case is really an employment case that talks about discrimination, harassment, and retaliation on the basis of sex or gender. And it's been filed in California, which is a very employee-friendly state. I personally would know because I spent a number of years as an employment litigator representing the plaintiffs or employees in a lot of these kinds of discrimination cases. But this particular case is not brought on by any individual plaintiff or even a class of plaintiffs. This was brought by the DFEH, which stands for the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. The DFEH is a California state agency which was created out of the Fair Employment and Housing Act, or FEHA. I know there's a lot of acronyms, but really just keep those two in mind. DFEH, FEHA. DFEH is the agency, FEHA is the act. But anyway, most lawsuits that you're going to see in this area of law are going to be brought by either an individual or a representative of a class in a class action. But in employment cases that are alleging causes of action for discrimination, harassment, and retaliation on the basis of sex, race, religion, what have you, usually those kinds of cases are almost exclusively going to be brought by an individual. And that's because a class action is typically going to require a certain number of requirements to be met in order for the court to proceed with the case as a class action. Those are things like numerosity, typicality, commonality. We've gone through these types of elements in previous videos before. So this case is a little bit different because it's a discrimination, harassment, retaliation case. However, it's representing a lot of people, so it kind of reads like a class action. But because it's been brought by a California state agency, they don't actually have to meet all of those other requirements that a normal class action would need. So that's the DFEH, and they are the plaintiff in this lawsuit. And on the other side, we have Activision Blizzard Inc., which is basically everyone's favorite gaming company to hate. That and maybe Electronic Arts, but I really think that maybe these days it sounds like Activision Blizzard is maybe even worse than EA. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments below. Now, like I said, Activision Blizzard is kind of this company that most people really kind of love to hate. And it's really because in recent years especially, they've had a lot of headlines that have come out about their terrible working conditions and about the massive discrepancies in pay between the bottom and the top. Basically, the main complaint seems to be that Bobby Kotick, the CEO of the company, makes probably way too much money. It's put a lot of bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and Activision Blizzard gets a lot of hate for that. Now, considering all of that, it is important to treat this lawsuit just like any other lawsuit, in that there are allegations that are made and they may be true, they may not be true. There may be some gray area in between where there are some claims that are true and other claims that are not so true. Really what it comes down to is how much the plaintiff can prove with evidence particularly that is admissible in court. Because there may be evidence that exists that can't be admitted to court because of rules against things like hearsay, all kinds of stuff like that. But in this video, I'm basically going through the allegations and not really talking too much about what evidence there may be or may not be for these allegations. And that's because what we're talking about here is a complaint that's been filed to open up the lawsuit. And a complaint does not need to have any sort of evidence that comes along with it. All it really needs to do is to allege enough facts and enough law so that they plausibly state a claim. Basically, they need to be able to point to some sort of law that they say was violated by the defendant's conduct, and they need to allege enough facts to basically give the defendant the ability to respond to those allegations, to say, well, no, the reason why this happened is because of X, not Y. If that makes any sense. Okay, so what are the allegations in this case? Well, they kind of fall into three main categories. Well, the first category is sex discrimination, and the plaintiffs are alleging that Activision Blizzard is discriminating against women in the forms of pay, assignment, promotion, termination, and even constructive discharge. Basically, the DFEH here is making a number of claims against Activision Blizzard, saying that they're doing things like hiring women for only lower compensation jobs, not giving them opportunities for growth or promotion, and also they're not giving them as much stock or incentive compensation. They're micromanaging women, particularly women of color. They're also saying that male supervisors are often delegating their work to female employees while they go off and play video games. They're terminating female employees way more quickly than they're terminating male employees in different situations. And when all else fails, according to the DFEH, they are essentially making the work environment so terrible that they are constructively terminating them. Basically meaning that the women are deciding to quit, but it's only because the work environment is so unbearable that they really have no other option. And one more claim under this category is that the DFEH says that Activision Blizzard is discriminating against women, and particularly pregnant women, or either women that are pregnant or women that may become pregnant. According to the DFEH, a couple examples that they found in their investigation are that women were not getting promoted because supervisors were commenting and saying that they were concerned that a female employee would become pregnant and, quote, enjoy being a mom too much. Another example that the DFEH alleged in the complaint is that supervisors apparently were giving negative evaluations to pregnant women that were out on maternity leave and thereby were ignoring the medical restrictions that were placed on these women by their doctors. Now, what's interesting here is that the DFEH limited the causes of action to being only claims for discrimination on the basis of sex. However, they did make some allegations that women of color were being treated even worse, which would indicate some racial discrimination as well. And as I just mentioned, the DFEH also alleged that there was discrimination against pregnant women or women who may become pregnant. Now, if I had an individual employee come to me and say that she wanted to sue her employer based on the fact that she was a woman of color and she was being treated poorly because she was a woman and poorly because she was a person of color, there would actually be two claims for discrimination under that basis. One would be discrimination on the basis of sex, and the other would be discrimination on the basis of race. And when it comes to pregnant women, there also would be two different causes of action there as well. The first one, of course, being discrimination on the basis of sex, but the other one being discrimination on the basis of a disability. A lot of times we think about disabilities as something that is a permanent disability, but pregnancy very much is one, and it's treated like one under California law. So personally, I'm not sure why those causes of action were left out of this complaint, maybe because they wanted to sort of narrow the scope because it already is a little bit of a wide-ranging lawsuit, but I thought that was interesting to note. Anyway, the second category of allegations that the DFEH makes here is under sexual harassment. And this is really what most of the headlines about this lawsuit have been focusing on because they're pretty horrific. And because a lot of these allegations are pretty shocking, I'm actually not going to go over them in too much detail because I don't want this video to get demonetized. Instead, I'll try to put a link to the complaint in the description below so you can read it for yourself, and I'll cover the basics of it so that you get the gist of it. But really, the overarching theme in this category is the DFEH claims that Activision Blizzard has a somewhat of a frat house-like culture at work. They describe an activity called a cube crawl, where men would get drunk at work and go from one cubicle to another and get progressively more and more drunk, and then would also start to make comments and advances towards women and make comments about their bodies and all kinds of jokes about things that start with R, that kind of stuff. Now, something that comes up in this category that was also just in the previous category is this allegation that male coworkers are playing video games during work hours. And something to note about that is that Activision Blizzard is in fact a gaming company. They publish video games. That's what they do. That's the product that they make. So undoubtedly, there are definitely some positions at Activision Blizzard that do require some video game playtime. I wouldn't imagine that every single position would require that or warrant that, but Undoubtedly, there are some. So that is something to keep in mind. That's not something that necessarily would negate this entire lawsuit, but it's something that I noticed. But another thing that's probably more important under this section is that they actually call out two specific individuals here. The first is Alex Afrasiabi. I really hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was apparently the former senior creative director for World of Warcraft, and the DFEH alleges that he was permitted by Blizzard Entertainment to engage over a long period of time in certain conduct that should not happen in any workplace ever. Specifically, according to the DFEH, he would regularly try to hit on female employees and try to kiss them and try to grope them, all of that kind of stuff. And according to the complaint, Mr. Afrasiabi's harassment of his female coworkers and subordinates was so pervasive that his suite was nicknamed by other coworkers as the Crosby Suite, which they say was a reference to Bill Crosby, which I think they mean Bill Cosby. I know sometimes people get confused between Bill Cosby and Bing Crosby, and they tend to mix the two together. Anyway, I think they mean Bill Cosby. But probably the worst allegation in this category, and maybe even in this entire lawsuit, is one made by the DFEH saying that apparently there was a female employee who worked for Activision Blizzard and was subject to so much sexual harassment that while out on a work trip with her supervisor, and probably actually after having had a relationship with the supervisor, she decided to no longer go on living. Like I said, the allegations in this category are absolutely outrageous, and if true, indicate a serious cultural problem at Activision Blizzard. Okay, so the final category of allegations made by the DFEH are really aimed at the leadership at Activision Blizzard, and those are for retaliation and a failure to prevent the discrimination, harassment, and other retaliation. Basically, the DFEH is alleging here that women were making complaints about their discrimination, their harassment, and all of the things that they were experiencing on the basis of their sex, and that not only were supervisors not doing anything about it, but they were in fact retaliating against them for making those complaints. And that in turn, that the leadership at Activision Blizzard was not changing anything to either prevent the harm from happening or prevent the harm from continuing. For example, the DFEH alleges that an employee complained as far up as the Blizzard Entertainment president, J. Allen Brack, saying that a number of employees were leaving because of these other issues. And according to this complaint, other employees complained to various members of human resources and got nowhere. And as a result, the DFEH noted that there was apparently a big lack of trust with HR and that HR was not held in high regard at all. So the DFEH says that there is a pattern and practice within Activision Blizzard in general that allows for this kind of harassment, discrimination, retaliation to continue, and they don't do anything to prevent it, even though they actually know that this problem exists. Okay, so what does the DFEH need to prove in order to win? So I will note that there are 10 causes of action. I'm not going to go through every single one because after a while it would get redundant. So the first 5 causes of action all allege some variation of discrimination on the basis of sex. So we'll talk about those all together. Basically, the way that they differ among the 5 is that they allege either a discrimination in the form of compensation or termination or promotion or constructive discharge or in the form of harassment. So for each of these causes of action, the DFEH has to prove that a number of elements have been met. And the first one is that the DFEH has to show that Activision Blizzard has discriminated against women intentionally by doing something specific, either in the form of compensation, promotion, termination, all that good stuff. Second, they have to show that the women experienced some sort of a harm as a result of the discrimination. And then, in order to attribute that harm to Activision Blizzard, they have to prove some form of causation. Basically, that means that they have to show that the harm that the women suffered in the form of compensation, termination, etc., was caused by Activision Blizzard's discrimination on the basis of gender or sex, and not on the basis of anything else. So that naturally brings up a territory of defense that Activision Blizzard may have in any of these causes of action. I don't know if this defense is something that factually is present, but this is something that would be available to any defendant in this kind of a situation. And specifically, they would be looking for other causes for that compensation, for that termination, for that lack of promotion, basically looking at either their skill set or something wrong that they did at work or other types of bad behavior that they engaged in. But something else that's likely to come up is something that I referred to a little bit earlier, which is the fact that this is not exactly a class action case, but it kind of sounds and feels like one. And basically what it sounds like we have here is a bunch of different claims and complaints from probably the last several years, because that's within the statute of limitations, and that are essentially being thrown at the wall to see what'll stick. There's not really a central narrative here, other than that these terrible things are happening across the board, and Activision Blizzard is not really doing anything about it. And when it comes to defending against a lawsuit like this, it is made much more difficult that there are these various claims and complaints that have been gathered from maybe over the last few years, because generally speaking, when you are a defendant in this kind of a case, you want to be able to respond to each example and each complaint that's listed here in this complaint. And truthfully, any defendant is really entitled to that in all fairness and justice. And that's something that makes this case a little bit strange because, like I said, it acts like a class action case, but it's not really. And usually cases where the core allegations are discrimination, harassment, retaliation, kind of like this one, usually are not going to be very good class action cases because they're very fact dependent on each situation. Meaning one of the examples that's listed in this complaint may actually be a very terrible case of sexual harassment or discrimination or retaliation, but maybe there are other examples in this complaint that are not really that great examples because the female employee actually was fired for sleeping on the job or doing something terrible at work or just not performing at all. So realistically, there are a few hurdles that the DFEH has to jump over in order to really succeed in this lawsuit, even though this is a very employee-friendly state that we're in. Now, the second half of these causes of action are really geared towards the leadership at Activision Blizzard, the executives and the supervisors, and essentially the people that can be considered agents of the company. So what they know and what they do can really be directly attributed to the company itself. These are the causes of action for things like retaliation and failure to prevent discrimination and harassment and all that kind of stuff. And for those causes of action, generally speaking, what the DFEH is going to need to show is not only did all of that bad stuff happen, the discrimination, the harassment, all of that stuff, but also that Activision Blizzard knew through its leadership, they knew that the problem existed, and they either didn't do anything about it or they didn't do enough about it in order to prevent it from happening or to prevent it from continuing to happen, or that they were actually actively retaliating against these women for making complaints about it. And when it comes to the retaliation claim, just like with the discrimination and the harassment claim, they also will need to show that the retaliation happened because they made the complaint about the discrimination or the harassment and not for some other reason like work performance. Okay, so that's basically what the allegations are in this lawsuit and what the DFEH needs to prove in order to win. But what do you think? Are you more inclined to believe that this environment of discrimination and harassment and all of this kind of stuff against women exists at Activision Blizzard? Or do you think that maybe these claims are possibly bogus, or maybe some of them at least are bogus? Let us know in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I really would love it if you'd hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, if you're new here or if you have seen a few videos here and you haven't done so already, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. That way you can find out when the next video is uploaded and you can join us in our journey towards our first 10,000 subscribers. See you in the next video.